There's a lot of Rastafarians out there.
Zoom. Yeah, we have a very heavy Rastafarian audience. So if you guys,
they're gonna write letters. No, they're not. They're not gonna fucking do anything.
No, they're gonna be like, complain.
They won't even stick a note in a bottle and throw it in the fucking water they're sitting right in front of.
No, they'll just play a reggaeton really loud and hope that the sound travels.
We're gonna get them.
Two sounds that I would be fine never hearing again, two musical instruments, would be steel drums and lap steel guitar in every fucking country song. I don't understand why every goddamn country song has to have that lap steel guitar, because it just wears me down. It's like, I can listen to country music. I enjoy, not as much modern country music, but I'm an old school country person because I listened to it in the 70s. My mom listened to it. But God damn it, anytime I try to listen to country music for more than 20 minutes and it's like that sound of that guitar is just going to break my fucking spirit inside. It hurts me.
Do you want to go outside and shake your fist at a cloud real quick?
There's not enough clouds here in California. Fuck this place.
Yeah, it's true.
Must be nice. I drove through a snowstorm yesterday, and then 10 miles later, it was sunny.
Yep, that's true. My wife just got back from Michigan last Saturday night, and she could not fathom how horrible the drivers are in Michigan. And I'm like, that's how I felt when I moved to California, is that California drivers are just the absolute worst. But now, 20 years living in California, I go back to Michigan. I'm like, you all motherfuckers are crazy.
You been to Illinois lately?
No.
That's where they're the worst.
I would guess Rhode Island, because one of the people that I worked with in Rhode Island, one of the other T people, when they came out here, we were driving up to the 7-Eleven to get some stuff, probably drinks or something. He accelerates into a parking spot.
What the fuck?
Like, I'm seeing the 7-Eleven, the side of the building, and we're just charging into it full bore. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing, man? And this is a guy who doesn't give a shit about no cell phone laws and like keeping your hands on the wheel. Fuck that noise. It's just like, I'm pissed off at everybody because I live in Rhode Island, and I'm just gonna fucking, like, parking spot is 20 feet away, 65.
Wow. I remember the last time that I drove in the Midwest, God, it was probably 20 years ago, or that I drove in snow. And it was just an act of God that I arrived safely, at that point. It's like when you deal with black ice, you deal with that feeling of just kind of like, I'm driving on snow, I can go only 20 miles an hour. It is much different, man. And I'm actually amazed that there are the fatality rate is not so lopsided towards the colder climates in this country.
Well, right now,
that's exactly it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to say right now, I'm trying to see. I don't even remember the last time you were on here. I may have still been in my old house when you were on our show last. Yeah, back in March. So we now live out in the middle of nowhere, like fucking 20 miles from a city. And it's way different because now when I drive home, I have to worry about deer.
Yeah.
It's deer hunting season up here. And I was driving home the other day and it was like twilight. So it wasn't, not the movie, the time of day.
Yes.
So I was like half paying attention to like deer and shit. And all of a sudden one just straight across the road sprinting and I almost shit my pants. But there was, I went north for a concert and there's a major highway that runs across the northern half of the state. Yeah. And we were driving home and there's just like, I had to swerve and stop 3 different times because there's just a deer standing in the middle of the road.
Oh man, that's crazy.
And it was like 2 days later, there was a video surfaced of a cop in like northern Minnesota that hit a deer going 114 miles an hour.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, just kind of peeled the hood back and liquefied the deer.
God, I remember it was like 25 years ago. It was in Petaluma. We were driving so Petaluma has deer on the west side of town if you go out towards the country more and towards where there's more wooded areas. We were just driving like on the Petaluma South Extension Road out near where the bowling alley is, and a deer literally charged our car from the side.
Jesus.
Yeah, almost ran us off the road. It was freaky and frightening.
Yeah.
And so we're now looking back on it. We'll talk about today when we talk about the movie. One thing that I like about this movie is it takes me back to my band days and, like 20 years ago, that sort of travel. That's the only thing that, I've never seen a movie tap into that nostalgia. I don't know if this was the same for you guys, but that feeling when you're in your late teens, like, or probably, people can drive in your group. And it's this idea that you just spend all this time, at least this is how it was in Petaluma. You spend all this time going out at night, out on weekends, and you're literally just driving around. You know, not like in a Dazed and
Yeah.
Confused or American Graffiti sort of way. Like you were driving the back roads, you're driving up the mountains. You know, it's like just a bunch of dudes driving around listening to music and talking because you have this sense of freedom, your own space. And, you know, you've got a piece of plastic in your wallet that gives you the right to do so.
Yeah, we used to call it cruising. So when I
Yeah.
was a kid, if we had enough money to get gas, we would just go cruising.
Yep.
And I lived on the lake, so the big thing to do, you drive around and then you would like pick out your song and you turn it up as fucking loud as you could and you roll the windows down, you just cruise past the lake and you let everyone know how cool you are.
See, that's different though. I think that element is more like the American Graffiti Dazed and Confused idea, where it's like you're seeing people and it's social. I'm talking about the rural version of that. Where
So
it's
we
like,
did both.
Yeah.
Because I lived in a city, but you could literally go 5 miles and you were rural driving.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did both too, but we definitely cruised up and down the strip in Taylor, which I don't know how it gets called a strip in fucking Taylor, Michigan, but
Taylor, Michigan,
that was
home,
one of the...
home of Joe C.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a deep cut right there.
Only know that because I literally was listening. Like, I've been watching a lot of late 90s MTV, just sort of leaked online, like 120 minutes. It's going like, this was a dark time for music. You know, like when Kid Rock was on 120 minutes. I was listening to that and it clicked. I was just like straight off the streets of Taylor, Michigan. Yep. Joe C. I went down to Kid Rock, Devil Without a Cause hole about a month ago.
I want to make a statement and then I want to start the show because I want to record a lot of what is currently happening. But I remember, and I was living at my parents, and my dad had a computer desk, and it was like in our loft, and there was a small TV that was kind of like off to your side, and I remember having MTV on, and I don't know, I was however old, and I just remember hearing the beginning of Bawitaba and just being like, "Fuck yeah!" And then I went and bought the CD. I'm like, it has a middle finger on it. This guy's so cool.
Absolutely, yeah. I was maybe 21 when that came out, but I had that same reaction. Like that record made me feel like my inner 11-year-old boy of thinking like, this guy's badass, man. You know, there's just something so like juvenile about that, but it resonates, right?
Yeah, I agree. Now, I'm going to start recording the show real
Absolutely.
quick, and then we'll do your intro, and then I want to go back to this conversation.
Okay, sure.
All right. Welcome to episode 106 of the Podcast Era production of the Galactic Network. I'm your host, Matt Stein. With me, as always, is Corey. I really like Beyonce, Scott. I'm sorry.
I don't like Beyonce as much as I respect what she does and semi-worship her.
All right, that got weird. So I'm going to kind of rush through this because we were having a conversation prior to recording, which I want to continue while recording. And I'm also a poor planner, so I have no proper intro written for this man other than Glenn Rubenstein, doer of many things. Because literally you do a lot of things, and normally I'm like, hey, what do you do? What do you want me to talk about? But I'm just going to let you do that now.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So I host some podcasts. I work in podcast advertising, and I've been around the scene, man. I don't know.
Well, back when there was a scene.
Yeah, back when there was a scene. No, but I mean, I guess now it's the podcast scene, right? It's sort of this idea. So yeah, no, I'm glad to be back, guys.
You want to talk about the podcast you do, or you don't care?
I mean, hey,
it's up to you. It's entirely.
I wrote a book about podcast advertising. People seem to like it. I host in secret, not really in secret, but I don't talk about it a lot. But I host the Wrestling Inc. podcast. So if you ever look at my Twitter feed and you're like, this guy talks about wrestling a lot, it's because I'm live tweeting Monday Night Raw. And yeah, man, I got into this business. Now I'm on the business side of things with my own podcast advertising agency. But the way I know Corey and I know you guys is that I once many moons ago was an aspiring podcaster, led to me working at the Twit Network on a failed video game podcast. I became the director of marketing there, got involved in podcast ad sales, and thus this shade of my career was launched.
Yeah, we actually just had Patrick Delahanty on Elts Nerds a week before last. And I got to name drop you, and you just saw the look in his face of like, huh? And I'm like, yeah.
It's a small world.
That actually describes me and Patrick's relationship pretty perfectly. Just sort of like, I know we're into a lot of the same stuff, but we're not friends, and we've never really gotten along. We've occasionally had some less awkward conversations, but just kind of like, yeah, we know of each other. That's a fact. We live in the same town.
Huh. Interesting. Well, for more on this podcast, including show notes, contact information, subscription links, you can go to gncast.com/pot. You can chat with us on our Slack channel during our shows, gncast.com/sign up. And while you're there, you can subscribe to our newsletter. One more quick thing before we go back to what we were talking about. What are you guys drinking? Probably water.
I got my time
Water.
travel pizzeria water glass. A different one than last time. Last time we had the blue Pepsi, but now I'm repping the old school
The
red
red Coke.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah. How about you, Corey?
I'm iced-teaing it. I almost brought a Mountain Dew in here, and I just forgot by the time the show actually started.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm drinking it's a bourbon barrel-aged sour stout called Mexican Cake Illuminati.
Ooh.
I wish I was kidding. Which I grabbed it because I started listening to Tom DeLonge on Joe Rogan and realized that he's fucking insane. Just throwing that out there.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. We can talk about that a little later. I want to get back to the music conversation we were having.
Yeah.
Is he certifiable like Billy Corgan insane though? Because I heard he was just on Joe Rogan too, and that guy seems
Billy Corgan was on Rogan. I didn't know that.
No. I mean, Tom DeLonge, and I know this because I like subscribe to the Blink 182 subreddit where every other post is about like, man, Tom is on some shit lately.
Mm-hmm.
Just aliens are real. Area 51 is a thing the government's been covering up. I mean, he is now making this kind of his endeavor, right? I mean, it's a business endeavor now that he's launching to, I guess, expose the truth, things that will blow your mind. This is beyond Art Bell, you know?
The last part I recall was he was talking about how this company that he started and it has money invested in knows how to shoot terahertz at a hunk of metal, and then you shoot a proton over the top of it and it makes it lighter. And that's how they're proving that spaceships are built in zero gravity and that life lives elsewhere.
Was he aiming that at U.S. officials in Cuba?
He also is talking about how he started talking about how he hates calling them UFOs. They are aerial threats, which is like when he said that, I was like, this is going to be fucking great.
As opposed to oral threats, which is everything that Tom DeLonge has ever done with music.
Hey,
well,
I like Blink 182 though, so I can't really.
I can't stand it.
Oh, man, it's funny though. You think back down to that "Aliens Exist" song from Enema of the State, and you're just kind of like, oh, the journey he has been on. You know?
Well, if you look at like a lot of the Blink 182 albums and everything, like you can totally tell that he's been in aliens for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, it's like that question though. You know, what would you rather listen to at length? You know, Oliver Stone talk about JFK and those conspiracy theories. Tom DeLonge talk about, you know, his alien theories and proof there, or Corey Feldman talk at length about his music career and how there's been a conspiracy, you know, to keep his music from succeeding.
He was looking for a bodyguard, and I was trying to convince my wife to let me apply. She said no. I'm like, but I could be Corey Feldman's bodyguard.
You know, I saw him live. He was in Petaluma.
I wanted to go, and he was in Green Bay, and I didn't go. How was it?
Better than you think. Here's what I figured out with the Corey Feldman thing. First, props to him for everything he's doing to expose the seedier, darker side of Hollywood. He's had a rough life. Definitely, there was no rule book for how he, you know, came up and the things he's dealt with. I think people, if he did not do the Michael Jackson cosplay tribute part of his act, people would take his music 100 times more seriously.
Just like we take Keanu Reeves's music seriously, or Brad Pitt's music seriously. It's like
Brad Pitt's music.
Yeah, apparently. It just like there's something to be said for, we wouldn't probably mock him to the same degree, but people mock Dogstar. It's okay. Yeah,
I mean, but it's now, you can't think of Corey Feldman and his music without thinking of that Mr. Show sketch. I can't remember the fake name, but they had the guy that kept doing slow motion, him doing the Michael Jackson dance in the line with the front of the paparazzi. Just, you know, that's what comes to mind for me every time now. But no, his music is all right. Even that song that came out a year and a half ago, when he was on the Today Show I mean, it's not the worst thing. You know, to what we were talking about earlier, I think I'd put it in the better half of most stuff I would call current music. It's not great, but it's not terrible. But it's a Michael Jackson thing that people just kind of go like, okay, this is really overt. This isn't an influence thing. This is an imitation thing.
Well, and he's pretty open about his relationship and how close he was with Michael Jackson too.
Absolutely.
So that kind of makes it worse, in my opinion, because that would be like, now, God forbid something would happen to Corey. I wish no harm to Corey ever. But say something happened to Corey, And I went and got a different co-host, and then I just started dressing like Corey, and I grew long gray hair and drank Lipton iced tea all the time.
It's coming. It's coming fast.
It's just fucking weird, and it's not like, well, I really admire this person. It's like, yeah, we had a close relationship, and then something happened to them, and now I am just trying to be that person.
Yeah. Actually, people are very dismissive, I think, when it's seen as that, when it's seen as but with Michael Jackson, it's a weird one. I mean, that's no offense to Corey Feldman, but that seems like that's really lifting up Corey Feldman high to be like, oh, he was riding Michael Jackson's coatails. It's just kind of like, I mean, not quite the same sentence. It was more of an imitation thing, but I get what you're saying. Who else had that was reading about and watching the TV movie about was this guy out of the 80s, Maryland, out of the UK, and he was like best friends with Boy George. And then he released a song that sounded like Boy George. His look was androgynous like Boy George.
Yep.
The famous story is that he's on Band-Aid. Do They Know It's Christmas? Not because he was invited. He just showed up at the studio and like somehow weaseled his way into it. But that's the thing. You can't be too closely associated with someone and do something just like them and expect people to be kind of like, okay, yeah, we take this seriously as its own thing,
Andrew originally wishes that he sounded more like George Michael when he put out his album, but no, it's funny because the other person that we know that spent a lot of time hanging out with Michael Jackson is Macaulay Culkin, and Macaulay Culkin definitely went down a fucking weird path into adulthood and stuff, and didn't necessarily do it by imitating Michael, except for in the whatever Simpsons music video thing that he showed up in. But it was still like, yeah, maybe hanging out with Michael Jackson is bad for young actors, and you can presume stuff happened. You can presume that it didn't happen. That to me is always for the courts to decide, but just proximity says your kids hanging out with Michael Jackson was probably a bad deal.
Isn't it weird how the public perception of that whole thing has changed? So not only since he's died, but in light of everything, there's this reckoning that Hollywood is going under now. And you look at Bill Cosby and all these other things that have come out that now in hindsight, Michael Jackson thing, there's a lot more reasonable doubt being pushed now than what people thought for the last 20 years or 15 years of his life.
Is it forgiveness because he's gone and because he was a master? We talked about it a little bit last week that there was a Halloween special that was based around Michael Jackson that premiered this year and had Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory in it. It was on CBS. And I'm just like, what is this that you're doing? Like, I don't understand the like, it's not like you're playing Captain EO on a holiday and we all get to see that because that went away from Disney or something. It's like you're making a new special, basically name tying Michael Jackson to it for Halloween of all things. And I just like, I'm not sure where that is coming from and what they're doing to decide who planned that out and thought this is a great idea.
Well, I mean, to look at what Disney did, that was Captain EO was gone for 15 years or so. And then after he died, because of the public outpouring and affection that people had for Michael Jackson after his death, Captain EO almost a decade long run at Disneyland and Disney World towards the end there.
Yeah. Didn't it take away the Muppets?
No, at Disneyland, those are in separate parks.
Okay.
And at Disney World too.
Yeah. And I never saw the Captain EO thing, so I'm not sure exactly how it was.
It's it's all right. We were at I spoke at NAB this year, and we were in Vegas, and we decided we were going to go to a couple shows. We went and saw like Donnie and Marie. We actually went and saw Jimmy World, who was on tour there, and I said, nice. I really didn't get the Beatles Cirque love thing at Caesars, but I said I've heard good things about the Cirque Michael Jackson 1 show in Mandalay Bay. Let's go to that, and I have to say that was phenomenal. And I think, Corey, I mean, you'll get this, is there's something about, I think if you just sort of give into it, and you see an experience like that, it does take you back to this idea, whether you were a huge fan or not. For me, it's like this ultimate nostalgia. I think people sort of took for granted after a while. I mean, he was like the biggest thing in music and perhaps in all of entertainment for a good portion, and certainly of my childhood.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people,
I'll definitely break out.
Sort of forget about that.
I'll break out Off the Wall sometimes and play it. Or I was listening to the Jacksons, the whole album Victory, not too long ago.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I absolutely admire his stuff, and I mean, he was a big part of me growing up as a kid. Not that I was like the biggest Michael Jackson fan in the world, but because you just couldn't not hear his music. And certainly from being a kid in the 70s in Detroit up through the 80s and stuff in Michigan, it was everywhere. I'm sure it was everywhere, no matter where you were. And it was really quality stuff. I definitely felt there was a change in his stuff going into Bad, and then everything after Bad became less and less important to me. But it was also, I was hearing it as an adult when my musical taste had changed, and I wasn't listening to the type of radio I'd hear his stuff as often as I did before. But that was also the same thing as we were hearing rumors and things at that point. So it was hard to decide to still be okay with listening to Michael Jackson at that point.
Good to prepare that, because I'm sure in recent memory, like, we live in a culture now where I think a lot of people are going to really start cutting their TV, movie, and music collections, reducing them drastically as every single day. I don't know about you guys now. I feel like I did after the election, where it's like waking up like, oh, what did Trump do now? And now it's waking up to be like, okay, who'd they get today?
Right. Yeah, it's the next sequel to The Purge is going to be somebody just going through their DVD and music library and just throwing things out like, oh, can't watch that anymore, can't listen to that anymore. But we talked about this a little bit last week too, and Matt had said something about a band that he liked for a long time, and then they kind of maybe murdered some people. I don't remember exactly.
No.
But it was.
Are you familiar with the band Decapitated, Glenn?
No. Okay, I thought you were going to go to a different one there, but no.
No. So the band Decapitated was recently extradited to California on accusations of gang raping 2 girls.
Oh Jesus, that's terrible.
Yeah. So their last album was very, very good in my opinion, and it's like now. Do I feel uncomfortable going to listen to it because of like now knowing what kind of people they are? Or do you separate the people from the art, and like, is it okay to listen to them?
I mean, but that's the thing with Michael Jackson too, is that even if everything turned out to be true, and it's kind of pointed out in the Dave Chappelle skit, but you have memories of listening to that stuff. I don't listen to a Michael Jackson album and think about Michael Jackson. I think about all the times in my life that I've heard that stuff before and how that brings that back. It was a part of the background of great points and moments in my lifetime. And so I don't listen to the music to support him. And you don't necessarily listen to those albums to support the band, although you did at first. It's more about, but this was something that meant something to me at a different level. It's the same thing of having ties to a celebrity that passes away. It's like no one claims that they knew who Tom Petty was as a person, or who David Bowie was as a person. We liked their stuff, and so in our minds we have a connection to them, but it's a connection with their art more than them as people. And they could have been very, very different in private life than they appeared to us in public life, or they're exactly the same. But it doesn't matter, because we gather what we need from it and we make it into our own experiences.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of conflicted Rush Hour and Money Talks fans that are saying, like, how can I enjoy that movie still?
I asked how you could have enjoyed Rush Hour in the first place.
No, I mean, I think for everyone, it's the Louis C.K. thing now, right? Like, that's the one that's really bringing it home for people, of the, how do I reconcile my appreciation for the work of someone? And that's, not to make light of anything, obviously, that Brett Ratner has done or is accused of doing. But I think that with some of these, they're not people that were held in like the highest regard artistically. And so it presents, the better their art is, the harder it is to reconcile the bad actions of an artist.
The Bill Cosby thing. Like, they're still playing the Cosby Show on TV all the time. There are days when that thing is just marathoning, and I'm like, I admire you for having the courage to keep playing this, but it's also courageous to not play it. I don't know how I feel about it. It's very, very tough, especially when you see someone who hasn't had to pay any consequences for what they've done. And I think that's always the thing that stands apart to me between a Roman Polanski and the guy who did Jeepers Creepers 3, although he's far less forgivable now that I saw Jeepers Creepers 3 as opposed to the first 2 movies. But it's just like, if you just if you just see the person who just gets away with it and feels no remorse and doesn't give a shit, it's that much more of a stab in a like, I really admired this person, versus the, oh well, this person was an asshole, was always an asshole, and I don't give a crap about Woody Allen's work in the first place, so who the fuck cares that he's an awful guy? Everybody should hate him anyway.
Yeah.
It's like, for somebody else, it's a much harder thing to choose.
Oh no, and I mean these stories that are coming out are horrible. And granted, as 3 white guys, I don't think we really have anything to add to the discussion about just
Not a lick.
all of the things that are coming to light now. And I think it is a change, right? Change sometimes happens in a very painful way, but it needs to happen. For me, my experience with this, and God, this seems so quaint now by comparison to all these horrible things that have happened. But in 2004, I volunteered and was a huge supporter of Democratic presidential candidate John Edwards.
Oh yeah.
Huge. I mean, I was just like, this is the guy, man. This is the guy, and then his whole thing happened. And it doesn't seem so quaint now that he just like had an affair and a baby he denied was his, I mean, that just seems,
well, his wife
like,
was dying from cancer.
If you read Game Change, it's not like it was a picture book marriage. That's all I'll say,
right.
But that's the thing. It's just, it keeps upping this level. It's just there. It's like the acts. I think soon there's going to be more of a scale to it. I think we're already kind of see that. And it's not people justifying what's right, but it's saying that, okay, well, there's inappropriate, there's awkward, there's serialized predatory behavior. And then there's just like felony sexual assault. And then
there's refuge in Alabama.
Yeah. I think people are going to start shading it soon, just because we don't want to have compassion or outrage fatigue, right? I mean, I think that every woman who's been wrong deserves to be heard and deserves to have her claim taken seriously. But tired if they feel like every day it's, and not just women, because it's men too, but I'm saying if they feel like every day it's some new thing, I think soon people are going to start sort of grading the levels of these and trying to put them into different buckets, because I think that's going to be the only way for people to process and move forward with this.
Yeah. And it seems so generally easy to dismiss women and specific women. It's like, who took Janice Dickinson seriously, the amount of times that she talked about what happened to her. And at some point people have not paid attention or not taken Rose McGowan seriously, because it seemed like, well, Rose McGowan's very different today. And it seems like, maybe she's not all together. It's like, but that doesn't mean, first of all, why is she like that? If she actually is, and if it's not just a perception, and two, that doesn't mean that what she's saying is false. It's difficult. And you're right. We're 3 white guys. What do we add to this conversation? We're certainly not supposed to be in charge of it, but we should lend support. But this is also like week 2 of talking about this. And like I said last week, this podcast is not going to solve a goddamn thing about it.
No, absolutely, man. Absolutely. And I think, that's part of it. And that's actually, I was thinking about this today, and specifically to Green Room, the film we're going to talk about today. And if you look at the state of horror movies right now, I mean, we see something like It that comes out that's almost a bit of a throwback to this bygone era of more creating mythology and doing more traditional, monster movies. But I think Green Room is a reflection and almost the second wave of what we saw happen 15 years ago with Hostel and The Purge, or not The Purge, pardon me, Hostel and the first Saw movies, and this idea of amplified violence and intensity in horror as a reflection of the times we live in. So I think that, we've seen that come back recently in terms of horror movies. I don't know about you guys, I browse Reddit a lot for recommendations, and I feel like every horror movie or even drama that people are recommending, they talk about the intensity, the unflinching nature of it. It's almost these movies that, to me, I joke with my wife and say, I feel like this is almost too real to watch, especially with the drama. We view movies as an escape, not a chance to just feel worse about all the things in life that we have to go through. But if movies, and especially horror, have always been a reflection of the times they're made in, I think it will be very interesting to see going forward, with what's going on now, how art reacts to society.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. I thought the same thing, is that with the themes in Green Room, it's like, holy shit, this is very timely, but it was 2 years ago, and that stuff hadn't bubbled to the surface like it has in the last year of the neo-Nazis and everything else. It was like there was an awareness, but there wasn't this intensity of like, oh shit, this is not only out there, this is accepted by a much larger portion of the nation than what I would have ever thought.
Yeah.
And that's very hard to watch at this point in time as entertainment, because it's so discomforting, because it's the kind of stuff you want to watch a movie to tune out from.
Yeah.
Instead of going deeper in it. I think I remember an article about the X-Files. The X-Files was really popular at the time that it came out because the intrigue and the conspiracy theory stuff and all like that was silly compared to like how people felt about the government at that point in time. It's like the deepest we were willing to go at that point was, oh, the president gets a blowjob in the Oval Office. You know, that's shitty, and we should impeach the guy. Yeah, but it's like on the scale of like horrible things, and then we get to 9/11, and it's fucking X-Files can't stand up against that.
Yeah.
And who wants to watch stuff that's going to be about that other than watching whatever the YouTube video was, dry lint, spare change, I don't remember, but it was like that's the kind of stuff. Like if you want to follow conspiracy theories, sure, that's your rabbit hole to jump down. But for most consumers, it's like, I want to see something that's gonna take me out of this. I want to see The Devil Wears Prada.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. So I had the thought, I gotta say, Matt, when I sat down to rewatch this, I was thinking, did I make a mistake? Did I make a mistake in picking this?
I love this movie.
No, not because it's a bad movie. I actually think it's phenomenally well done, but in the sense of the first time I watched it, I'd heard so much about it on Reddit. I guess we should probably talk to people about if you want to recap on what it is. But the first time I watched it, it was a sense of that I heard this is a really, really intense movie. I wonder if I can make it through it, because I've heard that it's worthwhile in being able to face this, you know, to literally flinch away from this unflinchingly brutal violence that happens in this film. And watching it the second time, it was the thought of, why did I choose to sit down and watch this again?
I assumed that all you're ever going to bring us is movies that have Aaliyah Shawkat.
I thought that as well.
Which I would not complain about, although I'd like her to not die all the time.
Yeah, because I keep thinking about, you know, what are movies supposed to be? And I think that movies for a lot of us are an escape. And in this one, yeah, I have so much appreciation for it, and I think it's so incredibly well done. But I guess it's sort of this idea of, I don't know, I don't want to say this like a challenge to sort of make it through a movie like this, but it's this idea that you want to go on this ride. You want to go on this feeling of, you know, being overwhelmed, helpless, and just sort of, you know, not breathing, for lack of a better term, in terms of just the adrenaline rush of, are these characters going to make it out of this situation, and how?
Yeah, if you ignore the reasoning of the why of the characters being trapped in this bar trying to get out, if you completely sidestep the motivations of the people who have them captured, this is not a far cry from Don't Breathe. You know, this is people who are in a terrible place, just want to get out alive. And there's tons of movies that have done that. It's just the window framing around it is, in this case, relative to, well, it's because they were neo-Nazis and they were trying to protect everything that they have, when somebody went fucking AWOL and did something really stupid, and then people from outside saw it and they couldn't let them go.
Yeah.
But if you think about the fact that if maybe Funke would have just not forgotten her phone, none of this would have happened.
That's true.
Yes.
Absolutely true. So, Matt, do we want to hit people off with a recap?
Yeah, I guess we should probably recap the movie and actually go to that portion of the show. Corey's far better at these things. I like to make him earn his keep around here. I'm really scatterbrained, so I let Corey handle this part.
Okay, so this is a movie about a band, which is weird because it seems like, Matt, this is totally up your alley. Sort of
What's
punk
that
band
supposed
that
to
is, because they're
because they're what? Because they're what? They live in a dirty
trying
band.
To make their way up, and they wake up in a cornfield. That sounded like you. We all got drunk and left the van running all night.
You know,
so
sometimes it happens.
They're touring around the country, and not big tours. They're playing little clubs, sometimes restaurants, sometimes lunch specials at restaurants.
That was my favorite part.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I liked it when Hedwig did it. They go out of their way to do an interview with a guy who was supposed to also be booking them a gig. The gig falls through, so he gets them something else, which is the restaurant scene. Totally underpays them and says, hey, to make up for it, I'll set you up with my cousin. It's a little bit out of your way, but it'll pay a lot more money, and you just have to go there. Are they cool? Nazis. Yeah, it's like maybe play your heavier stuff from the first few albums, and they go in there and they see Confederate flag up on the wall. They see the crowd. They understand that they're in a situation where they're going to have to lean into some things that maybe make them a little uncomfortable. But they play the show. The show goes over reasonably well. They get paid. They're walking out the door. And like you said, Sam, the guitarist, she left her cell phone. And Yelchin goes back to get it out of the room and walks into basically where someone has just been murdered. One of the guys who works for the bar has stabbed a girl directly in the head and doesn't feel any kind of remorse about it at all. No. And so he freaks out, rightly, tries calling the police, tries to run them out of there. They all get trapped, get pushed back into the room, get locked in. And essentially the people call the owner of the club and the guy who runs their organization as sort of the cleaner from Point of No Return, La Femme Nikita style. And he comes in there and tries to negotiate with them to come out. But the whole plan is obviously they're not going to make it out alive. And it goes from there. It goes from a locked room situation to them spreading it out. They empty the bar out and get more of their believers in, Justin believers, and who I assume is the same crowd. And and they all show up and try to take them out. And it's who lives, who doesn't. And it's not totally Pat Hollywood, but it is that there's going to be two people probably that live through this, and you can kind of guess at which two it's going to be. And it doesn't quite do the hostile ending, but it does get a little bit cleaned up at the end of like everybody gets their comeuppance in a way. But overall, it is hugely uncomfortable. It is a lot of like believable moves for what they have available to them of how they managed to take some of the people out. It was solid. It's a hard watch, man. It is not an easy thing to keep track of. But Patrick Stewart playing so against type in this. I'd say this is more against type for Patrick Stewart to me than the movie Jeffrey is. This is just like, holy shit. He's excellent in this. And Anton Yelchin, I think, is excellent in a lot of things, or sadly was. And I think he was perfectly good in this, but he doesn't seem to play the lead as much as he's just one of the group. There's nothing about him that makes him seem like he's the spectacular one that you're rooting for, other than the fact that he's kind of where our focus goes most of the time. The lead singer of the band is definitely a dick and a little bit of a hothead, but the rest of the band, they all seem like any one of them could be who the focus is. It's just, again, we know from watching movies where it's going to go.
Yeah. And it's something. So for me, the autobiographical part that I tap into, again, talking about things that I don't really promote or aren't an active part of my life as much, but I was in a band from 1995 to 2002. We toured a fair amount, mostly in California, but also in the Pacific Northwest and Southwest. And I really related to this idea. And if I have one qualm with the movie, I wish they would have just said it in 1995 or 1994. Because it felt contrived to have this idea like, oh, this band's not on social media. And they say like, oh, we don't do social media. We don't want to be, really out there and have this presence. The idea that there's a band touring around living this lifestyle now, in the year 2016, when this was released, playing hardcore music, like that's a little far-fetched to me.
It exists.
I know it exists, but I'm just saying the idea that if they would have made it take place in the mid 90s, they wouldn't have had to
put the social media thing in there.
Yeah, sidestepping posting on Instagram, hey, we're playing at this little dive bar out in the middle of blank. So there's no way to trace where they are.
Yeah, and even the cell phone part with it, with like her having the phone, and the idea that no one else in the band had a phone on them that was all confiscated. I just think it would have been a little more believable, the idea that it was so isolated. And what I tap into with that personally is that I remember in like 96, 97, like we would go and play shows in Sonora, California. And that's, I mean, literally up in the mountains, middle of the state. You drive for 2 hours, you feel like you're on the road to nowhere. And remember playing like the skate warehouse, you know, and it was like the owners of the warehouse, and there were maybe 10 people at the show. But it's the sort of thing where, you know, I think we put out something like on our website at the time. We were on like the list, which is a local list of shows. But, you know, had we been in an accident or something happened, people wouldn't have figured out for a couple days, you know, where we were supposed to be. And accidents happened a lot back then because you had bands. I mean, I remember, oh my God, I think back to now when we would have like 8 people crammed in a, you know, 5-passenger van with all our stuff in the back. We'd have someone sitting down, you know, on the floor of the van. We'd have people like stacked in there. I mean, accidents would happen. People would do all sorts of stupid things. The world felt just so much less connected. And I feel like that would have been a slightly more believable scenario for, the hopelessness of their situation.
Well, I remember the first time I went out on tour having like a binder full of MapQuest directions from show to show. And we like lost it on the 3rd day, and we're like, well, I don't fucking know how to get around.
Yeah.
And it became very difficult. But yeah, it's a far different situation as I played in bands longer and longer. GPS and cell phones, and you know, you used to have to, I've heard stories of people like you have to find a payphone to call the promoter because you don't know how to get exactly to where you need to go. And
we did that. We absolutely did that.
Yeah. I mean, that was, you did it before I did it. I was out of high school in 2004, and I didn't start till 2005, but you know, at least we had cell phones when I did it. Yeah. I remember playing in Ohio for the first time and not recalling that there was like a time zone change.
Yeah.
And just like freaking the fuck out. But we had cell phones. We could call the promoter and be like, hey, we're just going to be an hour late because we didn't, you know, but before a cell phone, man, that would have, man. Yeah. It's
when I moved to California from Michigan, my mom got me a triptych from AAA. That was how I knew how to take the southern route to get out here.
Oh, yes.
And I'm not a person who follows maps a lot. So it was like, I was constantly second guessing myself and pulling off at one exit to turn around and go back the other way. And like, you know, am I west or east? I have no fucking clue. It was just a lot of that. And that is absolutely where horror movies today have challenges. And I think maybe even we talked about this a little bit last week, the idea that when Scream came out, it was everybody had cell phones. And that was a big part of what the movie was. And so updating the stories to feature the technology of now, as opposed to trying to weed it out of the story and still make it believable, seems in some ways like the smarter way to go. Well, but I do get that she was the only one who had a phone, because they make the point of like when one of the guys is trying to call somebody, she's like, well, it's my money that pays for the phone, because they were having to live on the cheap. And that, as a band, I can understand.
And that was the point I was going to make before, is that is the only thing that makes sense to say, like, well, we're so fucking poor, only one of us can really afford the phone. How, I don't know. But just the whole social media thing just seemed forced. Like, if you're a band, why wouldn't you want to put it out there and be like, hey, this is... Like, why would you want to make being in a band more difficult?
Yeah, exactly. And that style of touring that they were doing, of like going, because I mean, look, man, I was telling this story the other night to my mom, actually. Not about the movie, but about my mom has a friend who wants to start singing in clubs and performing in clubs, you know, and she's asking me all these questions about my band days. And I was explaining to my mom where I was like, look, it was exciting. It was a great time in my life. I don't regret it. I think there's a lot of great stories and life experiences I got out of it. But a lot of time, we were driving to 40 minutes to play at a pizza place. We were basically driving there for the story of playing the show, not that we gained anything whatsoever by playing the show. Jeff Gersman of Giant Bomb fame, he's the one that started the band with me. And back when it was us and our friend Brendan, and it was just straight hip hop with samples before we added a live band. I remember, yeah, one time we drove to like a pizza place in Forestville to play a show of us doing our, somewhat profane rap music, our bad, suburban white boy rap music. And we were playing we got free pizza and $20, and we played to the pizza parlor owner, and we played to two parents and their child. And I'll never forget this memory is Eazy-E had recently passed. And for some reason, I had like a promotional photo that was sent to me because I was reviewing records at the time. So I had like a promotional picture of Eazy-E. It was one of the things we kept like in our binder of like lyrics and whatnot. And we just set it out and on the window of the pizza parlor in front of a candle in memory. And I remember the dad pointing to his son and he'd say, "See, and they have a picture of their dead homie." the rest of my life. Now that story and that experience absolutely worth that evening out of my life to sit there and play our songs, our songs like Mattress Disco and the songs about these fantasy lives we wish we had to a child and their parents, and we got free pizza, but we didn't really we lost money on the endeavor, and we certainly invested a lot of time. So the band in this film, the Ain't Rights, I know the existence they're going through, and it made a lot of sense to me. If you look at the mid-90s, the type of bands you'd see featured in maximum rock and roll, who didn't want to sell out, didn't want to go to a major label, and would just, I also booked shows in Petaluma at the theater here in town, and we'd have these type of bands come through all the time, and you could tell they've been sleeping in the van, sleeping on floors. They were literally playing for gas money to get to the next venue. We would, pay them whatever we could afford to, but it was a tough life, and they were doing it because it meant something more to them. I don't see so much evidence that type of scene really exists these days.
And if it does, you're using social media because that's what helps keep you alive. That's what gets your people to follow you around, to show up, to say, oh, we play these little clubs where nobody's ever heard of us. If there's the off fucking chance that one of the people in that town has heard of you, then you do everything you can to get that one person to show up at that club, and preferably bring some friends so that it actually gives you some income. Just showing up and saying, oh, we're going to play, nobody's ever fucking heard of us, and we bring you no audience. That's fucking ridiculous. Nobody would do that.
Yeah, I completely fucking forgot what I was going to say. God damn it.
But it's a weird nitpick with the movie, and I guess in nitpicking this, it's really the only nitpick that I have with the film as a setup. I actually would go a step further. I would say not even the 90s. I would say if you would have done this and said it in the late 80s or early 90s, the reason why that would have been even better is there was no common knowledge awareness of the white power movement in those pockets of the country where and the thing that I thought of with this, and look, I claim to be no expert on the subject of neo-Nazis or the white power movement, but I did see that HBO documentary in the 90s that talked specifically about the bands and the punk scene and metal and how they were infiltrating that. I saw, what was the one with Ryan Gosling where he played the white power guy that was Jewish? Saw American History X. And recently I watched the Daniel Radcliffe movie, The Infiltrator, which actually better than you think it's going to be. Harry Potter goes undercover with the neo-Nazis. And I think that my understanding is now a lot more people know about these gangs and this section of the movement. And I feel that if they could have said it at a time before the technology was there, when the lifestyle of the band made more sense, and when people weren't aware what they were, like completely unaware what they were getting into, I think that would have made it even more powerful.
I gotta say, Daniel Radcliffe is in this great position where he gets to be brave as shit in the choices he makes and the roles and stuff that he takes now, because I've seen him in a lot of very varied stuff, and even if it's just okay, it's still good enough for the watch. And totally. and I am not surprised at all that he would do something like The Infiltrator, and it would actually be pretty good.
Yeah,
but Glenn, based on your saying, so if this movie took place in the 80s, you wouldn't know as much about white power, that statement. Now, if that were true, would they have still been able to keep in the part where they open the show with a cover? What was it? Fuck you, Nazis, or
no, not Nazi punks, fuck off.
Nazi punks, fuck off. Now, I guess you could still do it in the 80s under the same situation. They would just have to know of the white power movement themselves to be able to do something like that.
And they would do the anti-Nazi ABBA cover instead.
No. Look, that song came out in 85. And my understanding of the punk scene is that it has always been known. I mean, I'll ask you guys, what did you think based on what you'd seen in the media the first time that you met or went to a show or saw a skinhead? And I'm not talking about like a Nazi skinhead. I'm talking about a reggae ska guy in a flight jacket. You know, I didn't know the difference. At first I was kind of freaked out. And then I had someone explain to me the whole origin of that movement, the way it was co-opted by white power separatists and whatnot there. So I'm saying this has been a problem in the punk scene going back to the birth of the punk scene, that there was, you know, sort of this bad element that was going to those shows and using it as a means to recruit. So it was known as a problem there. But what I'm saying is the lengths of this empire that Patrick Stewart's character was running there with the drugs and all this other stuff like that, I don't think was, for me, probably the HBO documentary was when I first really became aware of how powerful these organizations were.
Yeah, where's the Time Life book about the neo-Nazi movement in America?
I was so. I mean, I grew up in Wisconsin, so like the white power thing wasn't huge here. So I never remember like seeing someone with a shaved head and being like, "Oof, that guy fucks." But I remember hearing stories when I was, shocker, this is going to be a huge shocker, but roughly from the age 18 to 20, I hung out in tattoo shops a lot.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And I remember meeting a tattoo artist from Philadelphia who would talk kind of about like what the music scene was like out there, and like, you know, this group of people and this group of people would get into fist fights all the time, and how he got like stabbed with a flathead screwdriver and shit. And I'm like, never ever have I ever gone to a show and been worried about it. But also when I go to a show, like, there aren't a ton of people that are bigger than I am.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, and that's the thing that I've always had, like, you know, my wife is 5 feet tall. So she's like, well, I don't want to go to a general admission show. I can't fucking see.
Yeah.
And like, I don't want to get pushed around. And I'm like, well, I'm 5'10" and, you know, almost 300 pounds. Like, I don't fucking have to worry about someone trying to hit me or push me or move me out of the way. So it's like, the things never crossed my mind because then I never had to worry about them.
Yeah.
So I never noticed a skinhead movement or skinheads, and I was never big into punk music. You know, I think I saw Bad Religion for the first time 2012, 2014, somewhere there. It was at Warped Tour too, but it was also, you know, your traditional style punk came out.
Yeah.
So there was a few I'd interacted with in my hometown, and it was the one that comes to mind was someone that I actually went to grade school with, and like I saw him kind of turn into like your, you know, leather studded jacket, mohawk wearing, shitty tattoo type punk guy, and pretty sure he's in jail for stabbing someone.
Oh, well, there you go. That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not as prevalent out here. So very long story short, yeah, I don't know.
Well, and I think the movie. I'm sorry, Corey. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say I don't know that I ever looked beneath the surface that far to understand what the background of the skinhead was. I could see somebody probably recognize them as a skinhead, but I don't know that I knew the motivations of what made them that, what was their calling card or anything else. They didn't look too dissimilar from skaters in the 80s. So I just would have said, okay, this is a punk rock person, maybe a little aggressive, but it never would have occurred to me that this is politically or racially motivated in any way. I could see meeting a skinhead and going, oh, that guy's fucking racist. But I don't know that I would have thought, oh, but that's you're in with the group. I never would have occurred to me.
You know what is a great movie, jumping off on that subject? The first, I don't know if you guys have watched any of the This Is England series. That it's a TV show, but originally it was a movie. And the first one, that's the main storyline. So Joe Gilgan, who's now on Preacher and was on Misfits in the UK, he plays a character, and it's him and his group of friends. Joe Gilgan's amazing in it, but it's how they're just really into reggae. They're really into the Specials and Dexy's Midnight Runners and bands like that. And then there's 2 or 3 guys that hang out with them that are just white separatist, white Aryan socialist guys, and about how they realize sort of the poison that is in the scene, to have this sort of nationalist, racial separatist movement infiltrate to them, which is just about music and style and fashion, and actually a sense of inclusion, you know, because they have people from many different cultures in their movement. So yeah, it's a complicated history. I mean, there's a whole other story of how that movement came to represent that, but that's really the difference, right? And I think what people, I can't remember, probably was around the time American History X came out. There's a couple other movies I'm thinking about, but they're saying, yeah, you know, this idea for a long time was, what's scary isn't the guy that looks like your stereotypical skinhead. It's about the person that holds these beliefs that looks just like, you know, someone that lives next door. Like that's
Right.
far scarier than people that identify. So long way around to it. One thing I thought that was interesting about the movie is that with Imogen Poots, her character, and a few others, they kind of make the point, it's background dialogue in one scene where they're calling her like a Nazi, and she's just talking about, you know, hey, you don't understand. It's like, we grew up around here. It's like, this is sort of normal, but it doesn't mean that that's what we all believe in. Like, there was the idea that to some of the people that were at that show, it was a scene they were involved with, not a movement or belief, even though that's
Right.
how Patrick Stewart's character ran it.
I didn't listen to a lot of rap or hip hop or things like that when I was a kid, but the friends that I hung out with did, and my friends were the ones who wanted to go see New Kids on the Block or wanted to see Milli Vanilli and stuff, and never music that I would ever want to listen to. But if they had said, "Hey, do you want to go to this concert with me?" I probably would have gone, because I would have been hanging out with my friends, and I probably would have had a good time because I was hanging out with my friends, but I would go home and still not listen to that music. It doesn't mean that I was right and they were wrong. It's just that we had different tastes, but these were my peers, the people that I like to be around. And, or in the case of Imogen Poots' character in this, it might've been, that's everybody that she had to hang around.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't always, you can decide, but then you're basically deciding to be a complete outcast. It's like being in a town that has a very strict religious culture, and you're a part of that church, and you may not necessarily believe in everything that that church follows or dictates, but it is your center for your community. So you kind of want to be a part of it, and you probably get a lot of other things out of it. It's just that those specific things you have issues with, you can't really talk about, because it means that you're disagreeing with your social circle on something. And that's why social circles always kind of scare me. It's like, I'd rather have a tight group of friends that we can all have our relative interests and disagreements on stuff and everything, but at least we respect one another, than be a part of something that is so big that it's like, when you get that bad seed in there, it's impossible to get it out, and it's impossible to lead yourself without losing essentially everything that you're a part of in the trade-off. I totally get the motivation for the character in this, that she kind of has to be part of it.
Yeah.
But then it blows up in her fucking face.
Well, and it sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and with everything that's going on right now. I mean, with the scandals, well, not even scandals, but just the allegations that are coming to light. I think that more and more in the case of art, where things like this are in people's face, right? When you kind of realize what somebody represents, and that the art is an extension of that person and their beliefs, regardless of how much you appreciate the art, you kind of have to have a gut check and say, am I cool with this? Am I cool with supporting this in any way, shape, or form? And it's funny when you tell the story about drag to a show. I think that, you know, like you were saying, you know, that back then it could have been New Kids on the Block or Milli Vanilli, but I think, what was that episode of Veep this past season where Jonah, they were overseas, and he finds himself, he's at like, you know, like a white supremacist like concert, essentially, when they start like busting out the Nazi flag, and he's just like, he was there to see like a metal show, you know, and it turns out it's like, oh, and it's like, please don't let anyone get any photos of this. But that's the thing, you know, it's, and a lot of times there are bad actors, not bad actors in terms of bad acting, but I'm talking about people who are perpetrating it's pretty terrible beliefs that are making it more palatable through art and entertainment. And I think that with music, man, that's definitely a thing. I mean, that was a problem with heavy metal. You know, I mean, think about bands like Screwdriver, and which is always the one I think of. But when you think about how there've been a history of white separatist, white nationalist, Nazi ideas through music, and it, you know, I don't think one has ever really cracked through to the mainstream, because as soon as
don't forget the Illuminati and Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Yeah. But once something starts to pick up steam, people kind of go like, no, this represents that, we're shooting it down. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's this idea that they're not going to let it gain traction or gain steam because they know how dangerous it is.
But
Sort
then
of
you look at
perpetuate that.
Scientology, and that is something that gained traction with the most powerful people in Hollywood, and has continued on despite the fact that it should have been broken down a long time ago, and because it's done really damaging stuff to people. But even when it gets exposed, it's like, shut that shit down.
But see, what's funny, in that case, you have artists that were already famous for their art that sort of became
Right.
a part of it. So, man, this is like a really deep episode of the podcast. I feel like we're tackling a lot of stuff here, talking about a horror movie. I mean, so to jump gears, let's talk about probably the most uncomfortable part of the film. How those practical effects, dear God, you know, I really wanted my wife to watch this movie with me the second time. I know she likes Anton Yelchin. But I told her, I was like, there's going to be like 4 times you're just going to have to look away. And she was like, no, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to do it. But when rewatching it, not the dog mauling, not the slicing the stomach open with a box cutter. It's the goddamn Anton's arm that's sliced up. That is the hardest thing for me to watch in the entire film.
And that you don't see it happen.
Yeah.
You know something's happening on the other side of the door, but when he pulls it back in and you see how broken the wrist is and how everything's just really just torn the fuck up, it's like, oh, wow. That is because then you have to fill in the blanks.
Oh, yeah.
And not having that visual on the screen makes it maybe even a little bit worse.
And did you guys know it's true? I had to look this up because I also watched You Better Watch Out recently. You can use duct tape in a pinch with a wound. Like, absolutely.
Really?
Yep.
I never knew that.
You're supposed to put gauze over it. You're supposed to put gauze or cloth over it because it'll make it easier to remove.
Yeah.
But you can absolutely use that to apply pressure to stop bleeding.
Yeah.
Well, shit.
It's not dissimilar from using crazy glue to close up wounds and stuff too.
Yeah.
I learned something today.
Had to Google it. Thought of this movie in particular.
Still.
I mean, how far away from that is using staples, which is actually how they do things in medical, or sewing stuff up, like Rambo. It's not ridiculous that it's something that you would do, and it applies pressure and keeps things closed if you do it right. If you actually have the training or the forethought to know what to do, it can make a huge difference and keep you alive because it stems to blood loss.
I'm going to posit the theory that the violence is what's kept this movie from being more popular. I know last time I was talking about The Final Girls, which by comparison, a delightful film.
God.
So many great escapist elements to it. So emotional, like a feel good movie about death and dying. I think of this as the brutality of the violence. I feel like this is such a well done movie, such a well done thriller. The intensity level never lets up once the inciting incident happens. But I think it's like those 4 or 5 scenes of just terrible violence that have kept this movie from being bigger, which is weird because the violence isn't really integral to the story. Like the gore rather isn't integral to the story, but I feel like to the director. Now, did you guys watch Blue Ruin, his other film?
No,
I haven't seen that yet. It's got the guy that played Gabe, the skinhead that has the change of heart by the end of the film. He's the star of that film. I've heard it's very good. I have not watched it yet though. And that's like a revenge thriller.
I've never even heard of it.
No, neither had I. But yeah, that seems, I could see where that would be, where the director would have his other works be known. Because it's a psychological, it's terrifying in the violence and stuff, but the violence is built upon the psychological belief system of these people. And just as soon as Patrick Stewart said, I need a believer. Oh, do you need 2? Yeah, 2's better. You know, and the 2 kids, the one willing to stab his friend, the friend willing to get stabbed, to then have to go off to jail for it and everything else, but because they're a part of something that they know that matters more than what's going on with them, and that they'll be rewarded for it in the system. That is scary. That is the kind of power that is frightening. The I will shut off every instinct I have that is my own fight or flight, self-protection, because I believe in something that's that big outside of me that matters more. And that
super terrifying.
Yeah. But at the same time, that can be very healthy and wonderful for a person if that thing is something that's good and about, you know, helping your community, helping your family, helping your church or whatever. Sure, that's all great. But it's still a little scary. it's still a little scary when you're willing to put your self safety outside of the realm of like, well, yeah, but I still got to do this. And the fact that it's for something that we know is so, let's say it, vile, makes it even worse.
Yeah. No, it could have just easily been zombies. It could have just
Yep.
easily been something. I think what makes it scarier is it's based on something that is true and that does exist.
Yeah.
God, I feel like we're all over the place with this.
Oh, yeah.
one.
It's okay.
But it's a tough movie to talk about, right? I mean, this isn't like, I feel like in recommending this to someone, you know who I've recommended this to actually more than anything is people I know that were in bands or that are in bands now, where I'm like, you have to see this. It will really fuck your shit up.
Yeah. Yeah. I've run very limited, but I ran lights for this band in Michigan. My uncle was doing sound for them. And so we were up for a weekend hanging out we slept in my uncle's van, but they had a mobile home that they brought up there and everything. And it was just middle of nowhere, could have been found dead in the woods 4 months later. Nobody would have questioned anything. And it's worrisome because you do kind of go off the grid. And at that point in time, there wasn't cell phones, there wasn't social media. There was basically BBS systems in my case, and nothing I could access from where I was. So it's like Hostel, except in your own country.
Yeah, it's weird. We had one time, we had like the Blues Brothers experience where we pulled up to this venue, the Mason Jar in Phoenix, Arizona. And there was like the grating, the like the fence in front of the stage. And it was
Chicken wire.
Yeah, and we're like, this is like a biker bar. There were some like really tough people there, and we need to go up there and play our, hip hop and ska music.
Tell me you did a hip hop version of Stand By Your Man.
No, but it was one of those like, okay, we're gonna get paid, and that's the other thing. Bands make stupid decisions. There's always a trade-off in being in a band. One, it's like we're doing this show because it's going to get us exposure, it's going to get us fans, we're playing to the right people, it's going to advance our career. Or the ones where it's this show pays a lot of money. And let me tell you, if you look back, actually I don't know where you look at it because we never publicized these, but Headboard, oh my God, we played like a charity, like a benefit lobster dinner, where we had to play, like everyone was sitting down eating lobster. We got $500 for that show. We played at a college in front of no one during lunchtime on Thursdays because they had bands. We got like $300 for that show. Like we would, if it was a multi-$100 show, there was one bar that was like, hey, we'll pay you $600 if you come here and play for the night, but you got to play 2 sets of an hour and a half each. We had 10 songs. So literally there were like long instrumental interludes throughout the night, because it was just about getting paid. We knew that we were not going to get any actual fans of that show. That was just a money gig that would get us to the next 5 shows that would actually advance our fan base more.
Yeah, it's the bar band, it's the wedding band, it's the things that I'll do to be able to pay to keep the equipment going, keep the van working so I can get to the gigs that matter. It's selling the single to fund the album that is going to contain a couple of songs that you actually consider art. It's the Sweet Child of Mine versus, Rocket Queen.
So one thing I've read also, because I've read a lot about this movie, I think because it fascinates me. It almost kind of fascinates me people like it. Like I feel like I appreciate this movie on so many levels, but I think like is kind of a weird term. Like I have an affection for this film, but it's not like it's feel good. Everybody should watch this. But I think that one thing I've seen observed a lot of the time also in talking about this movie is the idea that the band sort of starts to abandon some of their posturing as it goes on when they have the desert island disc conversation for the interview. And then when they talk about backstage where they're about to die, everyone's talking about, Prince, all these different less punk bands. I think that's kind of interesting too. The idea that, but is to, you guys talked about earlier, you have the different archetype of personalities, but it is almost random in terms of who survives because I can't remember, was the singer or the drummer, or no, it was the drummer, the one that was the MMA fighter, like he's the most legitimate badass in the band. And then he just gets like, I can't remember. He crawls out a window and gets stabbed to death,
Yep. Yeah.
After seeing the story.
I mean, he absolutely could have been, but that's like having Chris Hemsworth being the survivor in Cabin in the Woods. He should have been the guy to make it all the way through. He was the stud guy who had a really good heart and was smart but also handsome, and like he was our guy. But no, he didn't become the guy. And then the potential boyfriend guy should have been our guy. He wasn't the guy either. There was no guy. In this, they didn't necessarily sidestep too much because, again, Anton Yelchin seems like he's looked at almost as the soul of the band in some ways, or at least the outcast within the band, which makes him kind of stand out a little bit more. And he's not sure what his desert band is, and we never find out, although I assume when it goes right from Who Gives a Shit to the ending credits playing Creedence Clearwater Revival, that must have been the statement of like, his desert band is Creedence. Can
you blame him?
I hope to God it is. But I didn't feel surprised by who died. There was certainly, like, I didn't want to see Elias Shawkat's character die. I'm glad they didn't show the amount of seeing the dogs attack at all, and seeing the dogs get attacked is even that much harder. Again, because I fucking tear up at animals, even if they're the ones that were initiating the violence, because they're
I don't know about
fucking,
that. That's where it's kind of like
because they're animals. Because they were
that's
taught
true.
to do that. They were created as monsters, and then you see at the end, the final moment is the dog coming back and not attacking them in the way that it was supposed to, but just going right past them and finding its master who's been killed and just laying down with him. That was, oh my God, that was heart crushing in this moment of like, yeah, but I wouldn't have felt like they would not be justified in shooting that fucking dog as it's walking up to them. But he paid them no attention because it was a learned behavior from the people who, and that is a statement about pretty much everybody in this. I think almost all
very
these people,
symbolic.
Yeah, it's a learned behavior. We have to do this because this is what we're told we need to do by the people who are in charge of us.
So with Gabe, the club manager, I thought his change of heart on the second time was sort of, I don't know, not as earned. Sort of like he's down there cleaning the crime scene and he just sees that there's two survivors. And he's just kind of like, I didn't know how fucked up this was. It's like, dude, how did you think this was going to go when you originally intervened?
He probably didn't want to get his hands that dirty. He was calm. He was collected enough of like, I can't be in charge of this. So I just have to contain it and get someone who can be in charge of it down here. And then I can walk away from it. And I don't think his idea was, I didn't think this was going to be this fucked up. Of course, nobody expected to be that fucked up. But I think it was more, I didn't expect to be here for seeing all the fucked upness. And I just,
the guy with the pressure washer that has to clean up all the
I feel kind of bad for that guy.
But that's just it, is you feel an empathy for the dude who was definitely like part of the instigation of everything happening, because your life is fucked, and he knows his life is fucked, and he would rather go to jail. And I was more impressed that he seemed to follow up on it when they let him go. Is like, we need the cops. I'm a part of this thing, and they're going to come and they're going to arrest me. They're going to take me away, but I'd rather go to jail than have this be my life anymore. That's why you could feel empathy for him, but still not a lot, because motherfucker, you were part of, once you saw a dead body, you're like, well, how many more are we going to add to the list?
Yeah. And the inciting incident I thought was clearer the second time I watched it through, in explaining that, I guess it was the guy's girlfriend that the other guy was going to escape with, kept behind evidence from a previous beating, sort of his insurance against Darcy, Patrick Stewart's character, ever coming again after him. I thought was interesting. I mean, actually, I liked this movie that had a very tight layered plot, but didn't have an over amount of exposition. That you really need to sort of pay attention to figure out, to unpack everything that's going on.
How hardcore was that fucking scene though, where the guy is like talking to Pat, and he's like, what was that second to last song you did? And what was the name? And he tells him the name. He's like, that was really hardcore. I did her to that. It's like, oh, fuck. Like, you're already in this situation where you are not walking out of here okay. But that was just, I really enjoyed what you did. It made my pleasure of killing this person all the better. Choke on that. Fucking shit. If there was ever like, I'm going to go and do I'm gonna play fucking DC Talk music after this and like walk away from the punk scene. That's the moment.
That's like Mr. Blonde meets Steelers Wheel, and it's just like, guys, I got to tell you, stuck in the middle. I share a really intense connection.
Oh man.
Oh god, he froze.
Oh,
There
did
it
I?
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got really tense connection, and then you broke up.
Yeah. Yeah, man. You know what I wish there would have been more of? I mean, because it was such a badass moment, is I loved their escape at the end. I love the thing when they really think about it and he shaves his head. I still don't understand the second time through why they put camo on themselves with a Sharpie. That was the part where
fucking weird. Like the whole whatever. What did they
fucking Odin? What the
Odin.
hell?
Yeah. The Odin paint.
But I loved their coordination at the end. I loved even when they were yelling out the stuff, the way they got the one guy down to the basement. I thought that was, I mean, I guess that's kind of real though, right? So if you go through the process, it is realistic to what happened, where they try and take control of what happened. They think, okay, we're just going to freaking go for it, man. We're going to make a run. They do that. That does not go well. They come back in, they deal with this stuff. And then you become so numb to the trauma that you actually can rationalize a tactical plan.
Having a breather moment in between and just like, well, we're going to die. Yeah. We're obviously going to die. Let's just see what we can do to take these fuckers with us as much as possible. And there was, at that point in time, the whole thing before that was, how do we get out of here? How do we get out of here? And then they see what happens when they get out. And they're like, well, that's not our plan anymore. So what do we do with what's here? How do we make this work now? And that was pretty good.
With the hiding in the couch and that whole thing, like that was a very triumphant moment. It was very good. And I guess maybe it would have been more of a trope that they didn't make it about, we're going to destroy the drugs or use that in some way, shape, or form to leverage our way out of here. That was the one thing that surprised me. Maybe because that would have been the cliche.
Yeah, and I also like the fact that when Patrick Stewart's character came in, Darcy.
Yeah.
When he came in, the fact that they eliminated guns being the focus of everything. It's like, to make this work, to get rid of these people and have it not come back on us, we can't just be shooting everything up and shooting them up and everything. So we have to, it made the suspense better. It made the violence better because it wasn't just thoughtless shooting people in the face. It was something that would much deeper of like, yeah, okay, they can get eaten by dogs, they can get stabbed, they can get all these other things. But it's not as simple as shooting them all and then pouring acid on them in a bathtub somewhere.
Yeah, I like that they had a much more, and then made it more nefarious, twisted, and scary. The idea that they were literally going to stage a reason for why they were all dead, tying it into the dogs. Watching it the second time, I did have the thought in the hand the gun over scene, and she's down there on the floor looking through that vent, where it was like, why not just kneecap them all, like just shoot them all in the knees and just run the hell out of there. Yeah. That was my only thing upon rewatch, is I think that make it logical, characters to give up the gun, but it is weird to think that the characters ever thought they were getting out of there.
Yeah. And there's that some of them still were, it was still a point of hope for some of the people in the room of like, maybe we can come to an agreement. They were still looking for, just get the cops here, just give us this thing of like, get the cops here. Let's deal with this through the legal system. Let's do the safety. And just, it was never going to be that, but that clinging to some semblance of normalcy and some semblance of trust of like, just please don't kill us. Just don't murder us all. It just would really suck if we all died in this room.
And they didn't go with the trope of the cop showing up and a cop being in on it. A cop being like that. I like that they avoided, actually, in a way, I mean, it seems like they purposefully avoided all of the typical ways that this could have gone, and which made it more intense and I think a more thoroughly well done film.
Yeah, it wasn't an easy writing. It was like they took some actual thoughts and they pushed past doing the simple things. Even the guy who was in charge of the dogs, you know, knowing that he's going to lose some of his dogs and everything, the remorse that he had of like, I don't want my dog dying without meat in his mouth, like that meant something to him. Those animals meant something to him. As awful as it was. Again, it's that like that little bit of something human in this completely inhumane character.
Yeah, there's probably like a grad school thesis to be written on this film.
Well, that's for smart people.
Yeah,
that's not what this podcast is.
But I think that's why it's an important movie, right? And I want to say that even though it's not the most enjoyable film, that's what makes it a great movie, in my opinion. That's the reason why I chose it, is because there's so much to unpack. There's so many layers. It's not cut and dry. It's I'm trying to think of a more intense thriller. You know, we hear about the term survival horror a lot, but I feel that as far as movies go, like this is the most, I mean, the most intense one in recent memory that comes up with me. I mean, I think about something like maybe before this, maybe like Breakdown with Kurt Russell, you know, I mean, but think about those. With this one, it's just, yeah, it just does not let up. And there's just so much going on there. And I think that's why I appreciate it, even if I can't say that it's enjoyable. But I recommend it if you're into that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think why it works is because it doesn't go into the ridiculousness of a Hostel or a Saw where it tries to outthink the audience. It is just purely terrifying because it's very real, because the situation is unfortunately way too relatable and approachable.
Yeah. Oh man. It's weird even in talking about it, because watching it again, like I told you guys, I had that thought where I was like, why did I pick this? Why do I subject myself to this? You know? But I think that for me, and I was never a fan of the Hostel type stuff. I mean, just reading about that, I was like, nope, not my bag, not my thing. First Saw movie, you know, all props to that. I think that there's a low budget horror film that did something really impressive, but then it got more elaborate and lost track of it. But yeah, I think as far as sort of intense horror movies, this is probably as real as I can handle. And maybe it's in some ways a lot realer, as you said, Corey, than the Hostels of the world, you know?
Yeah. Matt?
So with that being said, do we want to rate it? I mean, we don't have to if you don't want to, but
no, we can. I mean, yeah, let's do it, man.
All right. So since you've been here last, we changed it. I keep saying
okay.
Every week I go through the same thing. Yeah, the whole like 3-tiered masturbatorial scale, it's got really hard to describe. So we just go on a strict 0 to 5 for the entire movie. Give an explanation of your number.
I would say it's between a 4 and a 5 for me. Just in terms of the sort of thing that I would put up there was art. Mm-hmm. In that, if you want a movie that is about survival horror, that is smart, not predictable, and has layered great performances, great cinematography, filmmaking, the intensity of it, I think is very well done. The only thing that I'll take away from it is that, yeah, not necessarily enjoyable. You know, I think it checks off everything that I think a movie should be, except for the enjoyment factor. And I think with that, your mileage may vary. It's kind of like the haunted house thing. You know, I watched Haunters. Did you guys see that? The documentary about the people that put on the haunts and the haunted houses, including the McCaney Manor, the crazy one that you have to go through like a background check. And for like this real sadistic guy, just like basically just like messes with you until he breaks you.
Heard of it. Yeah.
So I was watching that movie, and I think, because I would never do that. I'm the type of person that will go to the Universal haunts because I like the special effects, I like the production value, but I don't really just want someone to just mess with me. I think this movie is probably at my line of how much I want to willingly partake in a visceral experience like this in filmmaking. So for me, that's the only reason I waver on the rating. Aside from that, I think it's as perfect as a film like this can be.
You're allowed decimal point rating, so if you want to do like a 4.5 or 4.25.
4 point. I would go 4.5.
Right. Corey, how about you?
I have to caveat this in that when we broke the scores down into subcategories, it may have landed higher for me in certain ones. Having to give it an overall, it's such an uncomfortable movie to watch. I can't wait to get this out of my plex. But it was very good for what it's supposed to be. It's just never a choice that I would make to watch this kind of film, because we know by this point in time that I'm uncomfortable with certain types of movies, and the Hostels and Saws and Don't Breathe land lower for me on the scale of stuff that I would run to in the horror category. But I don't want my score to take away from the fact, like Glenn's been saying, if it's your thing, you're going to really like it. So me, it's more of a 3.5. Yep, that is me.
I really like this movie, and this is not the first time I've seen it. I was really excited when Glenn picked this one. It's really uncomfortable without being like too uncomfortable, and it hits close to home with the whole band thing. And you know, there's a lot of times where we've driven to shows and you never really know who you're going to encounter there. I remember distinctly playing in Chicago once, and we played in the basement of a coffee shop in which the ceiling was so low that our singer couldn't stand straight because he's like 6'2", couldn't stand upright, had to like kink his neck. There was water dripping through onto my bass drum, and I just remember us being like, wow, this is like fucking Silence of the Lambs. And then the owner came down and his name was Bill. So we're like, God, we're all going to die. So this movie hit really, really close to home in that sense. And I think that's why I like it so much. So I give it a 4.5.
Yeah. And to what you were saying, Corey, I think that unlike Hostel or Saw, it's not excessive. It's not gorier than it needs to be. But that being said, some of those practical effects are brutal. Yeah, the arm thing, man. And the box cutter to the stomach. And the box cutter to the stomach, reason why that I think is so shocking to people is how nonchalant in that scene.
Yeah, just how do we know that he's gone? Let's just check. That was perfectly smart. And at that point in time, I think she had been aching to see that guy dead.
Oh yeah.
And that's uncomfortable too. But yeah, it's nowhere near as gory as Saw or Hostel, and that's not really what makes those movies tough for me. It's more of the outright anticipation of seeing someone get just destroyed in a certain way. And those movies, as much as I enjoy Saw, the first one, they don't have the depth that this does. This is a much better example of that intense storytelling without going into the cheesiness over Hollywood stylized factor. Yeah. I think they all have something that they offer for different reasons.
You know, we didn't talk about it, but just to touch on, did it get you guys with the shock of how quickly that hope spot in the middle was just literally, just shut down?
We made it out the door. Oh, great. Well, what's the next part? It's like being in Cube, and it's like, oh, we made it to the next room in the Cube. And now half of us are dead because of some laser beam that went across the floor.
No, not that part. With the trader. The trader comes in and is just like, oh, let me show you where the shotgun is behind the bar, and just too slow. I like how it's set up that we really think like, oh, this is really about to change gears. We've got, like just going so against cliche and just literally shutting that down so quickly.
That was fast.
Yeah. It's just it's a fucking great movie. Like, yes, just go watch it. Stop listening to this and go watch it. And on that note, Corey, you want to read us out of here?
Yeah. If you go watch this, we would love to hear your opinions of it, especially if you're squeamish like me, or a psycho drunk like Matt. You can contact us by leaving us a voicemail at 805-328-3966. You can email us at pot@gncast.com or leave us a message on the website. You can also follow the show on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. We are at Podcast of Terror. We have our own Facebook page. Liking it, just you won't see a lot from us because fuck Facebook, but you can kind of like chat with us and stuff, and that's fun. You can subscribe to us via iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or any of your favorite podcatchers. You can leave us feedback there. Also, there's this thing called Podchaser, which is in beta right now. That is, in some ways, it looks like it may hopefully replace iTunes as the review.
iTunes is your podcast overlord. Accept it.
I would love to see that change.
Apple Podcasts.
Apple Podcasts. It either one is a bane to my existence. So if you like me don't really love iTunes, you can go and check out podchaser.com and maybe leave us feedback there and help that thing take off. Subscription options and links can be found at gncast.com/subscribe, and you can also follow the network's Facebook page. Look under Galactic Network. And I think that's about it. Glenn, where can people find you?
I am at Glenn Rubenstein on Twitter, and or adopter.media for my agency.
There's that. Corey, how about you?
Man, unfortunately, it's been such a tough month. And by the way, I apologize for having to leave mid-show last week to all listeners and to Beach. But I haven't been posting in a little while on don'taskcomics.com, but there is still a lot of content there. And I really do plan on getting back to getting in the groove of posting the comics every week. But you can check that out right now.
Last thing, we started a Amazon affiliate page, so you can help support us and make this thing free. If you just go to amazon.podcastterror.com, shop like you normally would. We get a small cut, costs you nothing. It'll keep this amazing show free for you, and it'll help fund my budding cocaine addiction.
That's true.
Which is not real. It's just beer. It's just stick to the legal stuff.
I'm just waiting for Amazon to start offering cocaine by drone.
just that drone's gonna drop that sweet nose candy in my front yard.
And then 15 years from now, we're going to be dealing with drone addiction.
Jesus Christ. The drone started doing cocaine. It's out of control. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Untapped at Matt the Lifeguard. I don't know. Tell me about good beers. I like beers. And next week, I don't know what movie we're watching. I have not gotten a response from our guest, but our guest is going to be Brett Zebarth. He's coming back. He's a guy. He helped with Karate Tortoise, and he works for a brewery. I know it's just an amazing little bit of surprise that I have found someone in the beer world to come guest on our podcast. But yeah, that's a guy. He's coming back.
Somebody who shares my love of tortoises.
That's true. That's true. It's a double. It turns both Corey and I on. So that's going to do it for another episode of the podcast here. We will talk to you guys next week.
Stay scary, everybody.
Awesome. Glenn, thank you very much. I'm going to end this right now because my piss sack is very full.
Go deal with that, man.
Glenn, yes. It was great seeing you and talking with you.
Good seeing
Always
you guys.
A pleasure.
We'll come back and talk about something more lighthearted next time.
Never.
What else has Leah Shuckhead done?
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Cool, guys. Have a good one.
You too, buddy. Take care.
Bye.
See ya.